welcome to the Dignity in Schools campaign, part two of a four-part series on building narrative power. And welcome to everybody who has joined. We're going to get started by sharing. I think there's, a small enough number now that people can either put it in the chat or come off mute to say hello and just share your name, your pronouns, your organization, and your location. And then we'd love to hear an example of a TV show, a movie, or a book that you think people take the wrong lessons from. Um, and you can take that however you however you interpret it. I will do it and give an example. My name is Natalie Chapp, she, her pronouns, Dignity in Schools campaign. I'm located in New York City. And I can kind of give two examples because I think it could be on purpose, like that the people who created it wanted you to take a bad lesson from it, or unintentional. So the first one that I thought of is Beauty and the Beast. I think that the lesson was supposed to be about like don't judge a book by its cover, but when you watch it with 2026 eyes, it really sends a very bad message about what kind of behavior is okay from a potential partner. So I thought of that. That's one where I think the movie got it wrong. And then I thought of another example, which is this is like an older movie, but maybe some of you remember the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas. And the tagline from it was "Greed is good." And the movie was supposed to be like negative, but a lot of people took it as like a positive, like good life advice. So can somebody jump in or go ahead and put in the chat some your name, pronoun, org location, and an example of a TV, movie, or book that you think people take the wrong lessons from?
My name is Charlene Campbell. My pronoun is mom because I have seven children. Always. Um, my organization is Kofi, and I'm in Chicago, Illinois. My mind was clicking real fast, like movie, book. But so most recently, that's on my mind. I watched this movie called The Long Walk. I had no idea what it was about before I watched it, but it was quite jarring and horrible that these young people would volunteer to go on this walk to provide winnings for their family. And there was no end to the walk. You just walked until the last one stayed alive. You couldn't stop. You couldn't use the bathroom. You could eat and walk, but any of those things that deterred you from the walk, they killed you. I was shocked. And
Mhm.
then recently I seen on TV about the monks that were doing the walk, and I'm like, wait a minute, so different, so opposite, just, and then I realized it was a Stephen King picture. I'm like, oh, okay, I got it now.
Yes. Great example. Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in? I'm just looking in the chat. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, The Simpsons. Let's see. Both Black Panther films. Those are some examples, one battle after another. Anybody else who wants to share, say hello either in the chat or you can come off mute and say it verbally. Your name, pronoun, organization, and location, and an example of a TV or a movie or a book that you think people take the wrong lessons from. All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you for those great answers. So I just want to review the agenda at first so we can see what's on deck for today. So we are going to start with a recap of our part one session. So don't worry if you weren't able to attend that. We'll review some of what we went over. And then we're going to mostly talk about developing your core message, why it helps. We'll share what DSCs is now. And then we're introducing a new idea here about finding the Easter eggs in your message. Um, what else is your core message building towards? And we have a video example of someone who is very good at sticking to their message. So we'll take a look at that in a little while. So we shared this at the last one and just wanted to reiterate that we understand you could be coming to this training like a few different ways. You could be, writing along with us with the goal of having your own full narrative plan at the end of the four parts. Um, you could also be preparing to do this process with a group, like do something like what we've been doing together in your own meetings. Or you could just kind of be generally learning to see where you can add things into your existing communications work, not necessarily like taking every single thing. And all of that is great. All that is a good idea. Um, I am going to the workbook um, that we developed that has a lot of the content in it. I'm just gonna, so you can see what it looks like. And this is basically where if you did want to write it out either on your own or with a group, like I said, the workbook is designed for you to be able to do that. So it's going over most of the content that we're going over in here, and it also has like ideas for how to do group activities on these topics. So basically, you can do all of this, like come up with your narrative vision, the core message, and the stuff that we're going to do later, kind of typing into this document. So I just wanted to make sure that people saw that we had that, and we have it in English and Spanish as well. So I think that is being put in the chat. And yeah, so that's something that you can use as a resource before or after these trainings. But I'm going to go back to my slides. Oops. All right, to share. All right, back to the slides. That was our quick one of the workbook. And I'm going to pass it over to my co-facilitator today, Jabari.
Hey, hey, just doing a sound check. Is everyone able to hear me pretty okay? All right. So yeah, no, thank you, Natalie. Really glad to be here. Much appreciation to Tilde. Much appreciation to you all for being here for part two of this building narrative power workshop. And we are going to go through a couple of slides together. But something I want you to think about as we talk about this idea of narrative power building, which is really a form of organizational storytelling, of movement-based storytelling. It's kind of taking a step back and thinking about the why of this kind of work in the work that we're doing. And so you all know me, avid reader, love quotes, love books. So there is a quote I'm going to share with you all, and then we're going to jump into these next couple of slides. And this quote comes from one of my favorite people, ancestor, former organizer named Jack O'Dell. Of course, many of you know that Jesse Jackson passed very recently. Jack O'Dell worked on his presidential campaign in 1984 and was also an organizer with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a force in the movement that, in the narrative arc of how the civil rights movement is talked about, is often not. But the quote, it says, the singularly attractive and most significant feature of any movement that is effecting profound change in society is the role it plays in creating a dual authority in the country. It is the authority of the movement as the people's response to the policies of the established authority, which gives the movement the power to ultimately affect a democratic transformation of society. And so when we're talking about what is narrative power building, it is the ability to name what is happening and name what needs to change and really name um, how it needs to change, the pace at which things need to change. It also is dealing with how we claim our own story, how we become not just passive recipients of information about our own experiences, but rather active participants in the details, the context, and the content of our real lives, and using that as a basis for building solidarity, building community, and building organization. It's the ability to successfully convince and or become the decision maker yourself. So understanding where are the pressure points, where are the action points, and how does narrative and storytelling really help shift the terrain of possibility in terms of how we move from one set of conditions to another set of conditions. And so, and again, this is not about are we making friends? While certainly preferred, it is about moving resources, moving people, ultimately moving policy, and really building power to win by changing, as it says in the bottom corner, narratives, beliefs, and action. And so, in short, narratives are again a collection of related stories representing a core idea or belief. So you can almost think about these collections as of stories as kind of revolving around something, and that something is that core message. Or it is that narrative, and we pick up these narratives, we pick up these stories that are often coded as normal, as regular, as status quo, as this is just how it is, through a myriad of sources. Because social structures constantly reproduce themselves. And one of the biggest ways that they do that is through narrative. We learn dominant narratives in different arenas of society. So it really passes through the institutional mechanisms. Like we have here some examples of school, and not just K-12 education, but also collegiate education, mass and popular media. This is why in the communications committee, one of the things we talk about often is where do you get your news from? Again, of course, there is no such thing as a single objective truth. There are commitments to accuracy, to fairness, to truth, um, but every outlet has some kind of agenda. Corporate media has agendas, usually beholden to advertising dollars. And so, how do the dominant desires of advertising companies shape the dominant narrative that we get as transmitted through mass media? Also through social media, more of an advent in the 21st century. You know, it was hailed as this democratization of communications. And in a lot of ways, we see where that is contested territory. Thinking about TikTok, thinking about Instagram, thinking about Blue Sky, thinking about Signal, all of these become potential terrains by which information and ideas are exchanged that then in turn shape how we relate to these dominant narratives that are being given to us by mainstream sources, popular culture, and family and community. So again, what we're talking about is not so much a moral conversation as much as a distribution conversation. And how do we remix, relate, and in turn reinscribe a body of narratives that suit the material and ideological interests that we're trying to affect in the world, in school systems, and in our communities. We can go to the next slide. And so narrative visions, or narrative vision rather, is the stories and beliefs about a topic of your work that you want to intentionally change. So that again, as we talked about, we can win things, we can secure things, we can build things, we can expand on things. And so some examples of what some of that kind of stuff can look like is, and this is a good activity for people to think through on your own outside of here and to constantly kind of return to. We will change the story about what so that people believe what. Something will be seen as what. It will be well known that, let's give an example, it will be well known that police do not equal safety. Um, People will regularly hear examples of these are kind of like markers that you're kind of looking for in your narrative vision. They can also be a space where you can assess how is the terrain shifting. And when we talk about terrain, I'm really a big fan of thinking about hyper local narratives. You all are doing work where you are. And so even as there are these big national narratives around education, those trickle down into your local communities, but also there are developments that are unique to where you are. So as you're thinking about this, it's very easy to kind of like pursue the big, broad kind of narrative. And I want to invite, as we're rightfully combating those, to also think about what are the conversations that are happening in your zip code? What are the conversations happening in your school district? What are the conversations that are happening in the areas where you're spending time? And how do you and your organization participate in shifting so that as we apply these categories as examples here, you can start to see where things are, but also in that see where there's possibilities for intervention, and then being able to return to these kind of narrative visionings and narrative power building to see are the core messages, which we're going to explore in a little bit, are the core messages that you are working to bring into existence really changing things and changing conversations where you are. And so that's essentially what narrative power building is in a sense. It's strategic storytelling as a mobilizing technology to connect to policy, perspective, and popular culture in a way that aligns with the goals we're trying to achieve. And so I'm going to toss it back to Natalie, who's going to talk a little bit about DFB's narrative vision, and we'll continue the conversation from there.
Thanks so much, Tafari. So I shared this on the last session. This is like a visual representation of the different pieces of our narrative power building plan that we came up with last year in our DSC Decodes calls. So we went through our narrative vision, as Tafari was just sharing. That's kind of where it all starts. What are the things that you want to change? And today we are going to be talking about core messages and then those supporting messages and issue framing. And through the rest of the parts of the trainings, we're going to be, looking at these other things too, like priority topics to illustrate your messages, tracking successes, things like that. So just wanted to end the combating harmful narratives piece. So I did have a couple of people ask questions about like why we did spend a lot of time both on the last call and this call already talking about things like heroes and villains and lessons that people learn from things like TV, movies, and books. And we talked about on the last session a children's story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. So take the I'm going to put us back into discussion and see like if anybody wants to share like why do you think we've been including those things when in the end we're really talking about like organizing and stuff like that. Like why do you think that we've been talking about heroes, villains, things like that? Go ahead, Liz.
Well, I think because that's what we are inculcated with. Like our existence is, comprised of messages, whether from our family, our upbringing, all the things that create our past, right? Who we are, education, and certainly media and books. I mean, I remember watching all kinds of things with my daughter, like, oh my God, all the princess stuff, right? And it creates a reality that isn't real, right? A lot of this. creates a reality that isn't real. And unless and until you can distinguish, like pull it apart, then you're kind of operating in that, right? Um, so that's my feeling.
Absolutely. Yes, it's not just a separate topic of conversation. It's very much connected to all the stuff that we're talking about in terms of narrative shifts related to, politics or policies, things like that. Anybody else want to share um, anything else about why you think we're talking about like heroes, villains, things like that? TV, movies.
Well, one other thing I thought about, um, organizers and folks who parents, students who want to change, have systemic change, are often thought of as villains. Like, why are you rocking the boat? Why are you asking for this? Shouldn't you be satisfied with what you have already? Um, so we are seen as the other and put in a position to always justify why we want what we want. So we're often seen as villains,
Yep.
in our work and in our asks and demands.
I think that's exactly right. I was thinking about it's almost like ruts on the street with wheels. It's like that's like what these narratives are, and people can get like put into those ruts even when they don't belong. Charlene, were you coming off of mute?
And growing up, we have these stories we read to our children. They watch these movies, and then we feed into, oh, the princesses and the princes, they're the good people. It's everyone that wears white, they're the right people. Then the villain is all dark and all, not bringing in anything about disabilities or what's going on. And then our children, from what we indated in them, grow up into believing these thoughts of, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, I'll be a nurse, not thinking of the work you got to put in it or the people you'll be involved. And that might not be your learning forte to be in that. And then they grow up in a misconstrued thought process about their life. I'm just guessing.
I think that's all correct. And I have an example, and I promise, it looks like somebody posted this before our training, but I did not see it until after. So I saw this post on social media, and I thought, here's a good example of people using the very narrative that we were talking about to make like what I personally think is a horrible and well, let's see what you guys think, but I'm not endorsing at all what this person is saying. But I did the very next day see this post using The Boy Who Cried Wolf to make a political point. So I can't remember if this was on Twitter or Blue Sky, but somebody posted basically sharing a New York Times article that's titled, I've covered police abuse for 20 years. What ICE is doing is different. And then a second person posted, we cried wolf about cops in 2014 to 2020, and now the wolf is here. So I have a few questions. And this is like a journalist or something. So it's not just a random person saying this. It's somebody who, people maybe look to for analysis of a situation. So who is the wolf in this scenario, would you say?
ICE.
Mm-hmm. ICE. who are they saying cried wolf in 2014 to 2020? So there really wasn't a wolf there?
Well, I don't want to take up, but it's like 2014 to 2020 highlighted many of the abuses cops had, racial profiling, stops, all of that, right? Um, and, wanting the big push to defund police, as they are funded, not we don't want police at all. But that's a narrative that was misconstrued. And so what I read from this, I didn't read the article, but what I read from this is that, um, police brutality, racial profiling, all of that was better than what ICE is doing now. Or not better, but, it wasn't as bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I take from that.
I think that's right. Other thoughts on this?
Who is they? That's what I want to know. Who are they referring to as they? Because I don't see a difference between the cops and ICE. They're doing the same thing. Just the ICE people are able to cover up majority of this stuff that they do. When the police was, if you saw the abuse and you saw what they were doing to people of color, you saw the faces, but ICE can do it hiding their faces and nobody knows who is who. But I want to know who cried wolf.
And last time when we talked about crying wolf in the story, who cried wolf?
It was
A
the
child.
little boy, right? It was
Yeah.
a child, yeah.
Yeah. And he was lying.
Right. But I don't think
Anybody
anybody was
else
lying
want to
about
say?
cops.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there a movement that was particularly strong from 2014 to 2020 that comes to mind for anyone?
We're talking about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, that's what I see. That's what I see when I saw that. But the person didn't say that. The person wasn't like the post is not Black Lives Matter was wrong. It wasn't so bad. Now it's actually bad. But they use this image of the boy who cried wolf to say a whole bunch of things, and I would say cast Black Lives Matter as a movement as being lying and like infantilizing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what does the person who posted this, what do they want us to believe about the people who quote unquote cried wolf?
That what you were experiencing, what you were telling people that you were experiencing really didn't matter, if at all, if it was true. But now that ICE is here, the things that we see ICE doing, that this is the wolf that matters.
Yeah. Yes. And so I wanted to share this example with, I feel like it's horrible. And I see versions of people saying this in, super long articles and all kinds of things. But because of all the things because of the story of the boy who cried wolf, they can say it in just a few words. And it carries this huge weight that people might not even like recognize the connections that they're making, when they weaponize something like this. So I wanted to give an example, like it in some ways, maybe it seems like silly, but then this is like how these things function. out in the wild. People are weaponizing these things. So yeah, now we're going to talk about developing our own core messages, and I'm going to pass it to Fari.
Back again. Um, so yeah, this is a really robust discussion, and I'll tell y'all this kind of work is really exciting to me. Um, I did put Natalie. I'm saying this out loud. I have I think a really crass example from Lee Atwater that I would like to share. Terrible message, terrible messenger, but useful message to what we're talking about. And I'll preface this by saying like trigger warning. There's some very terrible language in here, and I think it's important to share because when we talk about narrative power, this is something that like the right wing does too. So I also want to frame this as like when people talk about the battle of ideas. This is kind of the terrain with which we're entering. So communications and narrative work is really a battlefield, and I think it's important to talk about it with that level of tenacity, tactical seriousness, and otherwise. And so this is a quote by Lee Atwater that comes out of Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor's book Race for Profit that talks about housing discrimination. And I'm reading it as a quote, but yeah, again, I don't stand by this. But it says, um, let me see where this starts. And it's talking about this narrative arc of a discourse on color blindness and meritocracy as like arcs to then constitute a racist intervention. And so Atwater says, you start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say that. That hurts you. It backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract. Now you're talking about cutting taxes. And all these things you're talking about are totally economic things. And a byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. We want to cut this. It's much more abstract than even the busing thing. And it's a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, nigger. And I think that, again, terrible message, terrible messenger, but this is the frame in which, again, we hear contemporary examples of this. It's about states' rights. It's about returning education to its origins. It's about these things when really, again, we know that these messages, these tactics are designed to alienate, isolate, defund, and deconstruct social fabrics that support Black, Brown, and working class communities. And so we're talking about developing core messages to combat that is, again, creating not just a container. And it's funny, Natalie and I went back and forth about like how many metaphors we want to go with in terms of how we tell these stories. And we talked about umbrellas, but I'm going to float it out there, but we're going to pull it back. And we can go to the next slide. But developing a core message is such an important starting point in your narrative power building because it does a couple of things internally in terms of your organization and then externally in terms of how you interface with stakeholders, constituents, people. Why having a core message is important is for a number of reasons. It's easy to remember. Again, so like a core message is not your thesis statement in terms of like an academic paper or the abstract. It's we are trying to do this, to do that, for this kind of a structure. It's also good as a orientating framework for people that you're bringing into your organization or into your awareness of the work that you're doing. It's really great for tracking progress because it helps focus and kind of polish your work, and it gives you a point of reference to return to. Like, are we on message? That's kind of where that framing comes from a lot. You can also boil your ideas down into something that will resonate with the greatest number of people possible and then build on the connection. So what we're talking about here is unity without uniformity, a single message that can connect to a range of people that may have unique or different positions and perspectives on what the issue that you're trying to collaboratively engage, but this core message gives you a foundation um, to extend out of. And last and certainly not least here, your core message is not your development in life. It is, and you can go to the next slide. It's not you're not bound to it forever. Just as organizations change mission statements, the vision statements, your core message can also and needs to update to address itself to the current messages and the landscape that you're organizing. And so this is an example. This is DSU's core message. We've worked on this for a while, and we've arrived at this is kind of our orientating articulation of how we approach all of the work that we do. Public schools are here to serve everyone. We can fully fund our schools by investing in support and care instead of punishment and police. And so what this core message gets at, and we're going to kind of extrapolate and break it down a little more in a little bit, but if you know anything about the Dignity in Schools campaign, you can kind of distill it into we're about these things. Public schools, serving everyone, fully funded, investing in resources and people and spaces and care, and also taking from other areas that we don't believe serve community and societal interests at large. And so that's kind of looking at how we've done this piece on core messaging. And that then again informs how we operate and work. But want to pause and see if there are any questions about core messaging, about DSC's core message, about anything I've said or the Natalie we said in this section. And if not, then I think we're going to go to a short break. But yeah, questions, comments, thoughts, aha. I see Mama Diana's hand up.
I don't have a question. Thank you for that, Tafari. I suppose, I'm sitting here laughing, and please forgive me for that. I do that a lot in my 75th year. And I think I do that not because I find things funny, but because, sometimes I just wonder where in the hell are we? And I love this, and I trust that at some point I will begin to digest, because I was listening to the piece around the boy who cried wolf, and the example where what Natalie had actually seen. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, because I understand that, that we have core messages. I understand all of that, but it seems as if, our core message. I know what our core message is. That doesn't mean that we have to work further on specific narratives for specific issues. But as you all were speaking about the boy who cried wolf, I was thinking, this is the 250th year of America's glorious celebration of who America is and the founding of America, right? And actually, it's in some ways it's an opportune time. But that core narrative really is a bunch of lies. It ain't about shit. It's part truth and part not, right? And so for me, even when I was thinking about when I think it was Linda that said the they, right? Who is the they, right? And the they is us. It's all of us who fight against injustices. It's all of us who know about what the founding of this country was about in terms of economics, right? And how the justification of a people being who they were, being black, being however we describe that group of people, right? And other groups of people as well. But we know we know what it was about. And so that's one of the narratives that I'm really trying to take an opportunity at this time to not necessarily debunk that narrative, but to bring out clarity around what that founding, what happened during the founding, what was it actually about? We when we talk about the founding of America, but then we leave out the whole issue of enslavement. That there was a country that fought for freedom, and yet that country enslaved a people. That Patrick Henry cried, "Give me liberty or give me death," right? And we were people that were fighting for freedom, and so I guess all of that just came to my mind as narrative, as Natalie was talking about that specific piece that she had read, and then as others chimed in. And I don't know if it has anything to do with the subject matter or not, but it's just what I had at the moment and what I felt I needed to share.
Absolutely. I would say this is exactly what we're talking about because, yeah, that's the founding of this country is like one of the deepest narratives that's affecting our work and our daily lives. So by looking at, less complex ones like The Boy Who Cried Wolf, hopefully we're learning the skills that we can do that work of dismantling these other narratives that have a much, you know, stronger. Yeah, Make America Great Again is absolutely a narrative that's impacting our lives right now, very much related to the false narrative of the founding of the United States for sure. As that would be a good example of what Tafari put in the chat. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. This is not who we are. Yeah, we're hearing that a lot right now, for sure. That's a narrative. Um, so we do have a break scheduled now, and I think I want to make sure that we do take it. So let's come back at 56 after. But if you're moved, people are sharing examples of these narratives in the chat. I would say, continue to do so we can see examples of that. So the next section is talking about leaving Easter eggs, quote unquote Easter eggs in your core message, and we'll explain what we mean by that. So many of you may be familiar with the concept of dog whistles. Um, a dog whistle is literally something that means a whistle that's so high pitched only dogs can hear it. But it's a term that people use to describe, saying something in words or phrases that promote, for example, with a racist dog whistle, you promote racist ideas, but that are coded in some way. So that's obvious to some people, but it can be denied, or maybe it's not clear to others exactly what they mean. So examples of common dog whistles, and the Lee Atwater quote was basically people, it sounds like him figuring out what dog whistles to mean when he really means, to say something racist. They're still doing that. So some examples of common dog whistles used right now to promote anti-Blackness are DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's very extreme examples of people using that in a way that, is directly anti-Black, but they're just using those words. Same with critical race theory and the term woke. In these examples, people were successfully able to change the meaning of these terms to mean something entirely different and then weaponize them. And so I will say, if all of this sounds like, well, how could you possibly, change these narratives? Like, it happens all the time. So we can absolutely do that too. And so our Easter eggs, we're saying, are something similar to a dog whistle, but that it's positive. So something that's hidden and sometimes contains a surprise. That's literally what an Easter egg is. It also refers to when a movie or a video game or something like that contains a hidden message that's recognizable to the people who know a lot about that show, but may go unnoticed by others. So it might be like I can't think of an example right now, but something where it's like if you've been watching it, you're like, oh, and not everybody would get it. Like they do that on purpose to signal to the fans, that like little things that only they would notice. So we want to send powerful signals with our language, but in a positive way that helps our organizing be more effective and win our goals. The idea is that by using a term that's not that controversial as a bridge, that's another metaphor. We've got umbrellas, Easter eggs, bridges. It can help persuade people to support our more complex or polarizing and controversial ideas. Um, this is not about watering down those ideas, though. I think this is not us saying don't say that. The intention is to shift the meaning of the word over time to include your definition of it. And it happens all the time. So we could do it too. And we do it. I would say. So Tafari just shared DSC's core message. Each of these words that are in blue are Easter eggs because for us, they mean specific things that we're trying to change over time what the definition is for people like at large. But the message itself, the vast majority of people would support what is written here. That's like that bridge. So public schools are here to serve everyone. We can fully fund our schools by investing in support and care instead of punishment and police. That the last part is probably the most difficult concept for like the widest possible audience, but basically everything before that, the vast majority of people would agree with these ideas. But we are clear that we mean something very specific by each of these things. And because I want to catch up on time, I don't want to go through each one of these things like in detail, but this is in our narrative power building plan, so we know what we mean by this. So when we're doing prepping people to speak or we're writing something, like we're doing the work of trying to build out these definitions of what we mean by public school. We don't mean voucher programs. We don't mean unaccountable charters. We don't mean private companies taking over schools. We mean community oversight and leadership, for example. That to us is what public schools should be. And we use that word very intentionally, that the people should control how funds are spent. It's our money. So when we use a word like that, contained in that is our analysis about small d democracy, how it should be functioning. And so we have that for each of those. Serve everyone is huge for us. To me, that links back to education as a human rights, protecting civil rights, quality public early education. It means all the different things that it actually would take to serve everyone. We are defining, this is a summary, but that's what we mean. So we have that like fleshed out for each of our Easter egg words. Like I said, I want to make sure that we get to a few other pieces. So I just want to give an example. I know there is probably still this gray box that might be covering things up, but we have just an example of an organization that has a long-term goal to create safe schools without police. One of their short-term campaign demands is to reduce the number of school resource officers in their school district and increase the number of staff trained on restorative justice. One of this organization's Easter egg words would likely be safety, because central to winning this campaign is successfully shifting the narrative about safety in schools away from law enforcement and towards holistic community-created safety. So that means like when they're communicating at public events and media interviews, reports, social media posts, talking to people on the street, um, everything should be tying back in one way or another on like that shifting definition of safety away from relying on police. Um, the next, so the next thing we were going to do is watch a video, but I just wanted to pause again for any questions on this Easter egg concept that we're talking about, and I will stop sharing for a minute to see if there are questions or comments. Part of the instructions in the workbook about how to do this is to, start by drafting the core messages, like the main thing you want to say, and then you can kind of be more intentional about exactly what words you choose. That's kind of how we did it on the DSE decodes calls. What are the main ideas? And then many of you might have even saw we had like a vote on like the final version of it between a couple of different options. Just so we were very clear on why we were choosing certain words. So yeah, again, any questions or comments on the Easter egg part?
The oh,
Charlene, you're on mute.
I'm processing everything I'm hearing, and I'm trying to um, move along with it into my own way of speaking, talking, who I'm engaging. And I guess just at the moment, I'm just kind of on slow mode, trying to put it all together. So I think that I'm just gonna have to like go through the workbook, which will probably help me. Because this is a lot, and I'm picking up and I'm not picking up.
Mhm. I think the video example may help as well, to see this kind of in action. And also in future sessions, we're going to talk about different audiences. So you brought that up, like, um, we're not we're not always needing that bridge of like our most uncontroversial, opinions. Many times we are talking to people who are on the same page or just need to be like, convinced of something small. You're gonna have, different ways that you can use different language, to different audiences obviously. So it speaks to like what they want to hear. Because for some people, you know, they want to hear the specifics a little bit more. So this is like the overarching piece, but when we're talking, but later we'll be talking like in the future sessions, different audiences can be like, directly talking about racism in schools, um, things like that. So again, it's not about watering down the message, it's about changing, for example, serve everyone. That has to mean that we're addressing racism in schools, for example. But anything else? I can show the video. And I'm praying that the audio will work. Wait, hold on a second. Let me just. So I edited this. Not an endorsement of any of the opinions of either of these people. But it is a very good example of a person who is able to consistently go back to the core message. And my guess is that that they are doing a like talking to the broadest possible audience here. And so I'm going to ask at the end what you think like his core message is. And I identified a few Easter eggs, I think, in there of things where he's putting out some ideas that maybe go further. Uh, but so keep an eye out. I'm going to ask about what the core message might be and what if you did hear any kind of Easter egg type things in this conversation. So it's very edited because I wanted to get like the responses. So there's all kinds of things that are edited out. And it's about 5 minutes. So there's a bunch of examples. Let me start here.
The meeting with the president, and as he said, it was a productive meeting focused on a place of shared admiration and love, which is New York City, and the need to
Don't
deliver
see the video.
to New Yorkers, the 8.5 million people.
Wait, really?
I don't think you're sharing right
Oh.
now.
Yeah.
Well, that would explain it. Sorry. I started laughing because of who popped up on screen, which might be shocking.
I appreciated the meeting with the president, and as he said, it was a productive meeting focused on a place of shared admiration and love, which is New York City, and the need to deliver affordability to New Yorkers, the 8.5 million people who call our city their home, who are struggling to afford life in the most expensive city in the United States of America. We spoke about rent, we spoke about groceries, we spoke about utilities, we spoke about the different ways in which people are being pushed out, and I appreciated the time with the president. I appreciated the conversation. I look forward to working together to deliver that affordability for New Yorkers.
It sounds like you had a productive discussion, but just days ago you referred to President Trump as a despot who had betrayed the country. You said you would be his worst nightmare and accused him of having a fascist agenda. Are you planning to retract any of these remarks in order to improve your relationship?
I think both President Trump and I, we are very clear about our positions and our views, and what I really appreciate about the president is that the meeting that we had focused not on places of disagreement, which there are many, and also focused on the shared purpose that we have in serving New Yorkers. And frankly, that is something that could transform the lives of the 8.5 million people who are currently struggling under a cost of living crisis, with 1 in 4 living in poverty. And the meeting came back again and again to what it could look like to lift those New Yorkers out of struggle and start to deliver them a city that they could do more than just struggle to afford it, but actually start to live in it.
I think you feel very, very strongly about peace in the Middle East. I think
We desperately want it, and that's something that I shared with the president, that when I spoke to New Yorkers who had voted for the president last November on Hillside Avenue and Fordham Road, I asked them why. I heard again and again 2 major reasons. One was that they wanted an end to forever wars. They wanted an end to the taxpayer dollars we had funding violations of human rights, and they wanted to address the cost of living crisis. And I appreciated the chance to discuss both of those things.
you said a lot of my voters actually voted for him, and
1 in 10.
and I'm okay with that.
And I just wonder to what extent the president's campaign style, his techniques, his social media use inspired any part of your campaign.
Well, I actually told the president that, so much of the focus of our campaign has been on the cost of living crisis. And when we asked those New Yorkers who had voted for the president, when we saw an increase in his numbers in New York City, that came back to the same issue: cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. And they spoke about the cost of groceries, the cost of rent, the cost of Con Ed, the cost of childcare. And too often politicians are looking to lecture to New Yorkers what they should care about, as opposed to listen. And when we spoke to those voters who voted for President Trump, we heard them speak about cost of living. We focused on that same cost of living, and that's where I am really looking forward to delivering for New Yorkers in partnership with the president on the affordability agenda.
And I think we have to work a little bit. We talked about Con Edison. We have to work a little bit on getting the prices, because, we've gotten fuel prices way down, but it hasn't shown up in Con Edison. And we're going to have to talk to them.
Like Mamdani talked a number of times about on the campaign, was shifting the tax burden for property taxes from what he called minority communities to white-based communities, and putting more taxes on white people. I also noticed that in your acceptance speech you didn't mention anything about America or Christians or white people in general, and so I didn't know if that was one of the policies that you guys had spoken about.
We focused on affordability. We focused on the cost of living crisis. What I will say is that I am very much interested in property tax reform, because what we see right now in New York City is a system that is so inequitable that it can't even stand up in court. And the president and I spoke about the importance of not only building more housing, but also making sure that regulation of housing is something that is manageable to actually get through, and not the cause of yet another weight that we see in our city.
But to be clear, you're continuing this idea of race-based property taxes.
No, to be very clear,
That's what you said.
no, the use of the term was a description of neighborhoods, not a description of intent.
So you intend to tax the whiter neighborhoods more?
No, we intend to create a fair property tax system, because we want a New York City that is not only fair and equitable, but also one that every New Yorker can afford.
But a very quick one for
Please.
the mayor. Why did you fly here? Aren't trains greener?
I will use every form of transit, and I want to make sure that they're all affordable in New York City, and that's why making buses fast and free is a centerpiece of our campaign.
Did you?
I consider myself the next mayor of New York City, and I keep my horizons firmly on New York City, and I appreciate the meeting with the president, which focused again on the 5 boroughs and whether New Yorkers could afford to live there.
Mr. President, you say you love New York City. Mr. Mondowney, does New York City love President Trump?
New York City loves a future that is affordable, and I can tell you that there were more New Yorkers who voted for President Trump in the most recent presidential election because of that focus on cost of living, and I'm looking forward to working together to deliver on that affordability agenda. I'll just add one thing to what the president said. Is one thing I also appreciated is in our meeting to appreciate a portrait of FDR and the incredible work that was done with the New Deal, and also in thinking about what it can look like when the federal government and New York City government work together to deliver on affordability. It can be transformative.
Okay. All right. So we don't know exactly, I'm sure written up somewhere is all of these things, his core message and all of the talking points. But if we had to guess, what are some things that are likely written up somewhere as the core messages he was trying to get out throughout his campaign, but definitely in this press conference?
Affordability and cost of living.
Yes, definitely. And if anyone is in, New York or that area, definitely certain things got to the national media. That was very clear in lots of different, you know, the debates and other things. That was like clearly a through line through his campaign as well. Any like reactions? So it looked different because like I edited out a lot of stuff, but any reactions to like seeing somebody stick to their core message? With like the funniest one to me is when he says, "You want peace in the Middle East, right?" And he's able to pivot that back to cost of living. He's definitely baiting him, I think, to give a different answer. But yeah, anybody has any reactions to seeing that in the context of what we're talking about today?
Well, he talked about inequity and being fair and equitable in the tax base. I mean, he came back to that because it's like, well, you want to tax white people. And he's like, no, I want it fair and equitable. And I wasn't sure. I think the FDR and New Deal was an Easter egg because people look at those programs as really positive for people in general, but actually to bring the middle class up, to support the middle class.
I think that's right. I heard that too. Other reactions?
When I heard he said that, I thought, okay, when they was writing this up, let's sprinkle something in there for the people that might not be on board. And at this point, if we say this, we can probably gather those in because we all know that that was a better administration. So it looks like you're trying to follow some similar things.
I think that's right, for sure. Any other responses?
Well, I heard push out, which is like, oh yeah, push out, and lift out of the struggle or lift out of struggle. So that to me was an Easter egg.
And so several people mentioned in the chat, the person I would say was trying to bait him about the question about white people and property tax. Several people wrote he took race out of it, like the person tried to set it up that way. And he responded in a way that, even someone, I'm sure the ideal is that people would hear it like, oh, that could affect me, like if I'm struggling. right now, regardless of race. He's speaking to everyone in these answers. Very interesting. Anyone, Diana or Kim, do you want to expand on that?
Well, I love the equity piece. I mean, and going back to equity and saying that, you know, I mean, it's understood that people of color likely live, I mean, you know, or mostly belong to the neighborhoods that are having to pay the same amount of taxes where people that are more affluent are. But he kept to the central message, and that is what was most important, that cost of living, affordability, equitability. I mean, even going back to isn't it cleaner to ride the train to get there? He talked about, you know, he was able to pivot on all of that and stick to the central message. So yeah, no, that was really, it's an excellent example and great editing, by the way. Say that.
Thank you. And mostly edited out people you might not want to hear from. Any other reflections? So the Easter eggs, I heard people mention equity in general, equitable tax policies, specifically property taxes, but he also said it generally. I heard that too. The FDR and New Deal, I think also is like what he's looking to the federal government for too. Like not just in general, but like that's maybe why he's being, so nice. Um, yeah, what were the other ones? Oh, the Con Ed one, that's our energy provider. He gets Trump to say like that he needs to intervene to have them charge less, which is not something typically like, more conservative kind of politicians talk about is like intervening and and that type of thing. So yeah,
I
those are
feel
ones
like
I
he also
remember.
brought, I mean, another really great point was him also bringing up, you know, like, well, does New York City love President Trump? And he mentioned specific areas that of
Yeah.
people that absolutely voted for Trump and that he spoke to everyone. I mean, so there was like an inclusivity there whenever he made that comment. So, and it made him almost look humane a little bit, you know, but I mean, but it was like he's speaking to the broader everyone. So that was, I mean, it's genius.
Yes. Again, not, endorsing, supporting any particular candidates or whatever. But when I was like, we need a video. And I was trying to think of an example, and this one came. And then as I was editing, I was like, wow, he's really good. He's really good at this. So I don't know, does that help make it a little bit clearer where you've got the core message that you keep saying that speaks to everyone, or maybe not everyone, but as broad of people as you can, but then you're also sending these signals, leaving these Easter eggs of things of like the vision that you have that's the people who are closer to your base are like, oh, okay, like he's really getting into it. He's really talking about tax reform and things like that. So speaking to different people like at the same time in different ways. I'm seeing nodding. That's good. All right, so we're getting ready to wrap up. Here, let me go back to the slides here. We discussed that. I think Tafari.
Yeah, so now as we start to transition towards a closing, this is now we've seen some examples. We've discussed kind of like what Easter eggs are and what they can look like and how you can embed them in messaging, how DSC is doing that. And now I think the time is to start thinking about how you all can pick up the strategy in your own organizational efforts, in your own organizational work. And we've seen a lot of examples through the doorway of public speaking, which obviously is a great way to disseminate messages. But it's also good to think about this in the context of your writing, whether op-eds or policy briefings or pieces. So it shows up and is expressed through all forms of communication. And so as we're thinking about that, that's the thing we want to kind of have you start to put on your mind are what Easter eggs belong in your core message. We imagine and know that some of your, I know your organizations have mission statements, vision statements, agendas, and all of those things are wonderful on paper and on websites. And we all know that you also are working in the world. So how do you express, expand, deepen, strengthen your impact in your connecting with people through embedding these Easter eggs in your core message? Again, just as a reminder, these Easter eggs should connect to your core message, to both your short-term campaign goals and long-term vision. So that also implies, you know, some planning and some thinking, and how that may help connect with new audiences. And so maybe you are, again, terrible word choice, but useful method, like this conversation of target audiences. How do you tailor a core message to reach them? How do you tailor some Easter eggs in to reach them? Words and phrases that aren't controversial as a bridge to persuade people to support our more complex or polarizing ideas. I liken this to like, how do you create a living room where everyone is that you want to be welcome is welcome? And then it's like, oh wow, I never tried this meal before. But you've already kind of set the terrain where people are comfortable stretching and extending into an area that they may not otherwise get into. And I liken this to like introducing children to vegetables and gardening a lot. Like one of the best ways to increase children's consumption of vegetables is by them spending time in like community gardens and spending time on the land. So building relationships to ideas is kind of like what we're talking about here. And you want to shift the meaning of the word over time to include your definition of it. Because again, so many people will say public education and they mean 1,000 different things. What do we mean by that? What do you mean by that? And so as you're thinking about your organization and your work, and again, this is not something that you should or have to do on your own or by yourself. Like something we talk about a lot and probably in, I think, the next session is this idea of pressure testing some of these things. And so, and I would say too that, we at DSC and the communications committee are like a resource to like talk through these kinds of things. And so as you're building out your organizational communication strategy or continuing it, this technology, if you will, of Easter eggs is something that I think is really good. But as we move towards a close, I do also want to just ask, are there any Easter eggs that you can think of that might fit in your work at this time, or that you may want to include in your core message that you haven't previously? So yeah, just open the floor for anyone that would like to share a thing or two, and then we'll move to close. And you can put it in the chat as well if you don't want to type, if you don't want to come off of mute.
One thing I thought of is that our goal, well, let me just say it, like have students be productive members of society. And when when we're talking about, students in urban areas and all of that, it's so tied to especially Black and brown, right? Of people who need public services, who need support, who need all of this other stuff to make it, rather than, and so that's one of the things I thought of, like productive members of society, or they know how to, they understand civics, so they understand their vote, that they understand, or they've gotten an education such that they can provide for themselves and their families. So
yeah, great example. Other and I'll say a lot of times what is confusing to where it can become confusing to general public is that a lot of times the right uses the same words, uses the exact same words, and so then people, but then like you're correctly alluding to, Liz, it's like, but what do they mean? In which context, in which ideological construct do we mean productive members of the nature of what kind of society do you want people to be productive in? And that's where you get to start to create those links and relationships. Yeah, no, it's good work. Any others? Last call? No, so I think then, again, please keep thinking about this, and we can start to move towards a close.
Thanks, Tafari, and everyone for your work here today. So this was a four-part series, and this was part two. So that we have two more sessions. The next one is March 5th, which is at the time that we normally have our DSE Decodes call, which I know several of you, join anyway, but everyone is welcome to join this again. And we're talking about tracking successes in field testing the ideas and those key audiences. And then the last fourth session, March 19th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern as well, combating opposition narratives, and then feedback on the training. And we also, we want to prepare a little bit for our session at the biennial meeting. We would like a few participants to present what you learned in these sessions so people can see kind of what we've been up to. So those are the next two sessions. Assignment, if you can, draft a core message with Easter eggs identified. We'll ask for a volunteer to share. Like I said, not going to put anybody on the spot, but it would be cool to see some examples. Hopefully the video helped yeah, like bring it all together. But thank you to Tafari, thank you to everyone who has been on those DSE Decodes calls, developing this content. Thank you to the interpreters for interpreting during this session. And that's it. Have a good rest of your day, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed. Have a great day.